Does your faith get in the way of your job? Get another job. Next on the Atheist Viewpoint. Welcome to another edition of the Atheist Viewpoint. I'm your host, co-host, Ron Barrier.
And I'm Dennis Horvitz.
And this program is brought to you through the good auspices of the American Atheist Organization at www.atheist.org. A few years ago at one of the atheist conventions, we were very privileged to have as a guest speaker Marcy Hamilton. And who is Marcy Hamilton? Well, she is the professor of constitutional law at the Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law of Yeshiva University, and the author of the book God versus the Gavel, Religion and the Rule of Law. And the reason we're bringing this up today is there are a few things going on, but let's start off, I think, which is the one which is the most obvious right now, Dennis, and that is recently in New York State we had marriage equality as the legal law of the land. And it turns out now that a couple of small petty town clerks have refused to issue marriage licenses.
Yeah, refused to sign the license.
Right, to same-sex couples on the basis that their religion deems these things, or homosexuality, however they phrase it, as either sinful or against God's will. In this case, it was in the town of Ledyard in New York, where the clerk, Rose Marie Belforti, refused to sign marriage licenses for same-sex couples who were sent to her deputy. Now her livelihood is at stake. She is staging a legal battle to keep both her job and her principles in a case that challenges the hypocrisy of the Marriage Equality Act. Now, I'm saying the word hypocrisy of the Marriage Equality Act. These are the words of Andrea Pizer, who is a columnist in the New York Post, who happens to think that marriage equality, I guess, is hypocritical. I don't know how it is, but anyway.
Does she go on to explain why?
All right, well, Andrea Pizer explains that this clerk, Belforti, joins two clerks that Ms. Pizer interviewed in July. Rosemary Senti of Guilderland, she kept her job, but had to stop performing all marriages after refusing to wed gays. I think rightly so. They changed her, assigned her to a different position.
Right.
Another person who refused, Laura Fatusky of Barker, was forced to quit. The law allows clergy members to opt out of performing gay marriages, which is, of course, probably one of the exceptions that the clergy fought for.
Well, you know what? If it's the clergy, that's the clergy, and that's religion, and who cares?
Right. That's not the issue. But now, the law does not protect the rights of those who toil as clerks. In other words, it does not protect if you are an agent of the state.
If I'm paying their salary, damn it.
That's it. That's correct.
That's right.
Our taxpayers' dollars are paying their salary.
Right.
And the taxpayers' dollars was used to promote and pass this bill, Marriage Equality Act. It's time for them to follow the law.
Yeah. What I mean, what if they decide some other couple, you know, some heterosexual couple, offends their religion?
Well, Ms. Pizer apparently thinks that that it's wrong that that clerks of the state must follow the law.
Right.
You know. Well, that's Andrea Pizer.
Laura Fatusky actually resigned in protest, it says here.
Oh, did she? She resigned in protest?
Yeah. I guess that was in the New York Daily News. She resigned in protest.
Well, good. Now
So
they'll get somebody else who will fill the position,
Right.
and people in the state of New York
Right.
Can legally marry.
Right.
That's all there is to it. I mean, I really don't understand their problems. Marcy Hamilton, to get back to her, wrote a very interesting article in the Daily News.
Yeah.
And of course, she started off with their town clerks in the state of New York refusing to sign marriage licenses for gay couples because they believe homosexuality is sinful. Okay, well, that's what they believe. However, Governor Cuomo has expressed a little sympathy, and he's taking the correct constitutional approach. Under state law, marriage is a right available to all. Once the state legislature has made that determination, no individual government actor has or should have the power to say otherwise.
That's correct. That's right.
Okay. But that fact hasn't stopped one clerk pointing to the book of Romans in the Bible from arguing that her Christian beliefs preclude her from signing a marriage license for a same-sex couple. Now, of course, 50 or 60 years ago, they could say the same things for marriage licenses for interracial couples.
That's right.
Mixed marriages, as they
Right.
would call them. I mean, now, we understand. I understand they're trying to claim the First Amendment. They have religious freedom, and you know, I think they should read the First Amendment. You have the right to believe anything you want to believe, okay? But you do not have the right to essentially make yourself a law unto yourself and trump the state law.
Right. Or
that's behavior.
Right.
You
You
do not have freedom of behavior just because that behavior is religiously, according to you, religiously induced.
And you don't get to use the government to do it for you.
Right.
You don't use the authority of the government to do it.
Then she goes on, of course, to with the usual, well, suppose this would happen and suppose that would happen. I'm not going to bother you with the details because, some of it has to do with the polygamists, and there are those who believe religiously they have the right to multiple wives. And
they're just as sincere in their belief as this woman is in hers.
Absolutely, And she was talking about a police officer who was citing religious pacifism, refused to fire a weapon at someone who was firing on a crowd. I have a little problem with that because I think if your religious beliefs preclude you from firing a weapon, you would not be on the police force.
Yeah, or at least not as a
Maybe a ticket agent or something.
Yeah,
like
or maybe you work behind a desk or something.
Yeah.
Right. But you shouldn't be a police officer, in other words.
But she says, obviously, in these cases, they would be fired if they didn't, discharge the duties of their sworn office. As the Supreme Court noted in 1879, no believer may be a law unto himself. Unfortunately, in recent years, the U.S. has had some troubling experiences sliding down the slippery slope of confusing religious doctrine with the law of the land. And this article, Dennis, and to our viewers, was particularly interesting in light that so many Christians say that their rights are being taken away. And yet, really, whenever you ask them, well, what rights are being taken away that preclude your ability to practice your faith as you see fit, they can't come up with one. They come up with something stupid like 10 Commandments on the courthouse.
Well, what's being taken away from them is the state imposing their religion on the general public. That's what's being taken away.
And that's true, and we've discussed it before. Christianity began as a state religion, has always been a state religion, and I think it's having a problem here in the United States holding on to the last grasping straws of being a state religion.
Well, but it's but it's not officially a state religion.
No, not officially, but please.
Yeah.
It's
de facto.
Yeah.
De facto state religion.
All we have to do is, again, if you look back at the archives of the programs, the one program Dennis and I did on the editor of the New York Times, I believe Kendall was his name, with the questions to religious candidates, because they were starting to wear their religion on their sleeves.
Right.
Anyway, she starts with the Misguided Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993, which essentially established that every single law in the country was presumed invalid unless a government could prove the law truly necessary and the burden on the religious believer was unavoidable. In other words, every law had to pass a religious litmus test. After the Supreme Court invalidated that law in 1997, wisely,
I think they still had adults on the Supreme Court then.
yes,
Sure.
yes, yes.
Okay.
Congress then reenacted it to appeal only to federal law, to apply to federal law. The result now is that even some of the most dangerous drugs with no medical purpose, which are categorized under Schedule 1 of the federal drug laws, can be used by religious groups without fear of federal prosecution. And I assume she's mentioning peyote, probably alluding to peyote
But
or
I thought,
mushroom.
yeah, in the Southwest. Yeah, I was thinking of that too, but I don't know. I guess they can. Yeah.
We'll have to look, but she says it can be. Religious doctrine is taking the upper hand in many states as well. In Texas, the Latter-day Saints lawyers have argued that their clients facing criminal prosecution for child bigamy and statutory rape have a constitutional right to engage in these illegal acts. In other states, Catholic bishops have routinely argued in clergy sex abuse cases, and you would know about this, Dennis,
Yes.
that they have a right to avoid a liability for the harm they caused when they recklessly transferred child predator priests from one parish to another.
Well, just as a side note,
Go ahead.
the author of this article in the Daily News, Marcy Hamilton, is also very active in SNAP, which is this whole movement to protect and prevent protect children and prevent further molestations. And not just priests now, but it's basically anyone.
So the SNAP situation is also a test of legal secular law against religious authority.
Right. Well, I mean,
Or what they're saying doesn't apply to them, and you're saying it does.
well, I mean, the law certainly applies, and lately there have been some victories because I can think I forgot what state it was, Wisconsin, in a couple of places where the Supreme Court has ruled that the Catholic Church can be sued, and that church records can be subpoenaed. But Marcy Hamilton has actually been involved in that.
Well, I mean, that's good.
I'd love
I mean,
to have her as a
this
guest,
is
I think.
criminal behavior.
Yeah, it is criminal behavior
Yeah.
that the law does not, does not allow criminal behavior. It doesn't matter what your religion says. If you honestly believe that human sacrifice will make the crops grow, that may be your honest belief, and you're entitled to believe that. You're not entitled to do it.
No, that's called murder.
Yeah, it's called murder. Yeah.
Right. Another thing and this one always flies under the radar. A lot of people do not know about this, and you can look them up on a website, Pharmacists for Life.
Mm-hmm.
That pharmacists with strong religious beliefs have argued that they should not have to give even run-of-the-mill contraception to women
Yes.
with valid prescriptions. In other words, a pharmacist can use their religious views to trump doctor's advice or doctor's prescriptions.
Right. Right.
And while, again, this show originates here in the Northeast, in the tri-state area, it's really not a burden. Excuse me one second. It's really not a burden to many women because there are pharmacies everywhere.
Right.
But this really plays heavy and becomes a burden upon women in the more rural areas where they will
Pacific
have to travel
Northwest.
essentially like hundreds of miles just to get a prescription filled. Of course, now with the internet, I guess you might be able to do that more so without going to local pharmacy.
Right. It all depends. There are certain drugs that still cannot be sent through the mail,
Right.
even with a valid prescription.
Mm-hmm. So she goes, well, the Latter-day Saints lost in Texas, as they should have, but the members continue to operate in violation of the laws in Arizona and Utah, where we know there's a very large polygamist enclave, I guess would be the word. The vast majority of states have rejected the Catholic bishop's demand for constitutional immunity from liability, but a few states, like Missouri, still shield religious organizations from liability for their reckless abuse of children. And Oregon is still wrestling with the cult Followers of Christ, who have permitted one child after another to die of medically treatable ailments. And to me, it should
That-
be a crime to deny children proper medical care.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I don't care
But
what
you
your
know,
beliefs
but you
are.
know that in New York State, they still have failed to pass a child protection law. It's because of the influence of the church.
Really?
You know, they still, you know.
Well, I know most of the religious organizations were also against anti-bullying statutes, because most of the anti-bullying statutes, of course, were aimed at those who bully young gay adults.
Right.
You know, teenagers and young gay youth. And Marcy Hamilton says, and of course I think we would agree on this, that the First Amendment, we have a First Amendment that protects your free exercise of religion. But nowhere in the Constitution do you have a right to break the law just because your faith says you can. And that's what's troubling, as we've spoken before, and I think we have to continually remind the general public of organizations like Jerry Falwell's Liberty University or Pat Robertson's law schools, where they outright teach that when you have a law that confronts your faith, now they're not advocating breaking the law. I
Right,
don't want to get
right,
that impression.
right.
But they are teaching to try and change it to accommodate your religious belief.
Right.
And you know, that's very dangerous, because
Which
when you change a law to accommodate a religious belief, that imposes that belief on everybody, whether you're
Right.
a member or not.
they have the right to advocate for change and to vote for change, but and it doesn't mean that even if it's passed, that the Supreme Court will necessarily approve it. But it's much better if the public is enlightened to begin with, and doesn't vote for it and knows what's going on, you know, and has that way you save a lot of time and expense and trouble, and it's much better it's much better to prevent a law that endorses superstition from being passed in the first place by not voting for people who would vote that way, or writing to your Congress people in the first place, rather than have them go ahead and do it, and then you've got to go and appeal to the Supreme Court. And with the way the Supreme Court is stacked today, you're taking your chances.
Yeah, that's right, because it definitely is stacked today, the Supreme Court, there's no doubt. Now, you know, speaking of the Supreme Court, that's an excellent segue, Dennis. There is a case coming up that's going to be argued quite recently. The High Court is scheduled to hear arguments. This is now the week of next week, the middle of October, right after, you know, coming up this week, over a Michigan Lutheran school's firing of a teacher who alleges discrimination because she has a disability. So they fired her, and she's saying she has a disability, and that, you know, they wrongfully did whatever it was.
Wrongful dismissal or something like that?
Now, the school's lawyers are arguing that the courts can't even review the claim because she was essentially a minister. And this is the crux of the case. The Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that she wasn't a minister because her primary duties were to teach secular subjects. And that issue in this Supreme Court case is something I had not really been familiar with before, but I'm certainly going to look into it, and I would hope that you know, some of you who watch the show look into it and educate yourself. And it's called ministerial exception. Have you heard that, Dennis?
No,
Ministerial exception. Howard Friedman, a professor emeritus of law, wrote that the basic rationale underlying the doctrine is straightforward. For a religious institution to thrive, it must be free from government constraint of selecting who will preach its values, teach its message, and interpret its doctrines, both to its own membership and to the world at large. Now, this is what he wrote. Now, to me, preaching the values, teaching the message, and interpreting the doctrine sounds to me like the job for a minister.
Yeah.
laws against religious discrimination in employment should not permit the government to tell a Presbyterian church, for example, that it must hire a rabbi. Well, it's not telling the church that it must hire
Of course
hiring
not.
a rabbi. But if they hire a Jewish accountant, I'm sure there's probably no problem with that either. But the question has gotten murkier in recent court cases in which religious groups claim that other workers, besides the most obvious, the clergy, are ministers and don't have the right to challenge their dismissals.
First of all, if a church is hiring somebody, the church is an employer and should be subject to any of the laws that employers are subject to. For the government to take over an employment issue is not violating the church's right to have, to hold, to preach, or practice a belief.
Okay, that's very clear. Repeat that again. I think the people have to know that. Tell them.
For government regulation of a church as an employer in an employee dispute, the government intervention and ruling does not interfere with the church's right to have, to hold, to preach, or to practice their belief. That is not an infringement of their rights.
Now, I had heard on the radio today, as this case is coming up close to argument, that they said that she organized even religious services for the children and
Right.
other things. So they said that, not that they hired her as a minister,
Right.
but because she does these things that a minister would do, that makes her a minister.
Right. Is she an ordained minister by any chance?
No, not at all. You know, actually, the broadcasting giant, Trinity Broadcasting, religious radio,
Right.
they do that. All their station managers are ordained ministers.
Right.
All right. Now, if the guy wants to be ordained as a minister and everything, then you take what's coming to you by you play by their laws. You play by
Right.
their game plan.
I mean, that's not
Now-
that's not telling them who they can hire.
No, that's not. Now, not only does this include teachers, but it also includes an administrative assistant who had been trying to fend off a race discrimination claim by a former administrative aide by claiming, well, she was a minister, so we can fire her, you have no recourse. Professors in a case involving Lexington Theological Seminary in Kentucky. The seminary persuaded the Fayette County Court that two professors it dismissed in a recent restructuring. All right, so it was a business restructuring, and they dismissed these professors.
Right.
They had no right to sue over breach of contract. Their case is now before the court. Argued one of the plaintiffs, a Professor Lawrence Kent, I'm glad that I apparently inspired some of my students, but that makes me a good teacher, not a minister.
Right. Right.
He also said that his designation of a minister at a Christian seminary is wrong because he's Jewish. The seminary argued that the professors were always required to be models for ministry. Now, I guess that's something they're going to have to define. What is models for
Where
ministry?
is this taking place again?
This is at the Lexington Theological Seminary in Kentucky,
Yeah.
Fayette County, Kentucky.
But that is regional. I mean, if anyone tried to pull that crap in New York, they'd be laughed right out of the courtroom.
Oh, yeah. So models. Now, being a model for ministry, if you lead by example, you could be an atheist and be a model for ministry. That doesn't mean you have to conduct the...
Well, I'll have you know that I am an ordained minister in the Universal Life Church.
There you go. You're a model for ministry.
I'm not I'm a model of the ministry.
In the Supreme Court case, of course, those supporting the Michigan teacher include the federal government and proponents of church-state separation, including various atheist groups, Coalition of Advocates for Victims of Sexual Abuse by Clergy. So I guess SNAP is supporting this in some direct or indirect fashion.
Yeah.
The arguments in the Supreme Court case vary. They don't want, in this case, they don't want to extend legal protections to perpetrators' employers. Here are some examples. Any given religious community is a mere generation away from extinction. said a brief filed jointly by the National Council of Churches and the National Association of Evangelicals. Teachers in religious schools are commonly on the front line of conveying the faith, arguing the government courts need to stay out. But a coalition of religion and law professors, once again, religion's on both sides of the issue. How Darwinian. They're going to win no matter what. Supporting the teacher opposed what they call the breathtaking expansion of the definition of ministers. One irony and injustice in the ministerial rule is that women employees of denominations that do not ordain women suddenly become ministers at the moment they file a lawsuit. And maybe some Muslims, Jews, or Christian Muslim and Jewish women may not become priests, imams, or rabbis, but the courts and churches confer ministerial status upon them long enough to keep their lawsuits out of the courts.
There goes. That's ingenuity.
So
we're getting the high sign.
Yeah, we're getting the high sign. Again, that's an interesting concept now, ministerial exception. Another example of how religious groups, once they are given an inch, will take the full yard and try to exploit every law, to break every law to suit their needs.
Right. Any case, we have to
wrap it up on behalf of myself, Ron Barrier,
Dennis Horvitz,
and Dennis Horvitz, and the American Atheists. We thank you for watching the Atheist Viewpoint. Again, visit our website, www.atheist.org, and there you will find everything you need to know about atheism. Thank you, and good night.
Bye-bye.